The history of empires begins in the fertile plains of southern Mesopotamia. Around 2334 BC, Sargon of Akkad established the world's first true empire after conquering Sumerian city-states. At its height, the Akkadian Empire stretched from the Persian Gulf to the Mediterranean Sea and encompassed much of Upper Mesopotamia, the Zagros Mountains, and the Levant. Despite the monumental achievements in its conquest, the Akkadian Empire turned out to be rather fragile. In little more than 200 years, the empire collapsed, and its capital city vanished so completely that its ruins were never located. What led to the fall of the world's first empire? The Curse of Akkad, a poem composed during the third dynasty of Ur, offers the earliest explanation. It blames the fall of the empire on the hubris of King Naram-Sin, the grandson of Sargon. After praying and seeking answers from the gods for 7 years with no response, Naram-Sin became frustrated and sacked the Ekur, the sacred temple of the god Enlil. For this transgression, Enlil disfavored him and summoned the Gutian nomads to destroy Akkad, bringing plague, famine, and death throughout Mesopotamia. Modern research shows a different picture. Southern Mesopotamia endured a century-long drought beginning approximately 4,200 years ago. Crop failures resulting from persistent drought undermined agricultural surpluses needed to sustain the military. Gutians simply capitalized on this vulnerability, descending from Zagros Mountains into an empire already weakened by crop failures and internal civil strife. However, from a socioeconomic perspective, the Curse of Akkad did reveal an important reason for the empire's fall: its systemic plunder of city temples throughout Sumer. The Akkadian Empire represented a radical departure from the political organization that had characterized Mesopotamia for centuries. Before Sargon's conquest, southern Mesopotamia consisted of numerous independent city-states, including Ur, Uruk, Lagash, and Kish, each ruled by an Ensi whose authority derived from his relationship with the city temple and its patron deity. These city temples were far more than simply places of worship. They were economic backbone of Sumerian civilization. The temples owned vast tracts of land and livestock, provided public utility services such as docks and taverns, and they supported a dependent labor force consisting of war widows, orphans, the elderly, and the disabled. These laborers were tasked with producing handicraft goods, which merchants exchanged for raw materials in neighboring areas. Additionally, temples served as society's primary repositories of savings. They stored the surplus grain and precious metals. Silver and gold offerings were often cast into sacred objects that could be melted down in emergency to purchase food, hire mercenaries, or buy off attackers. In this way, surplus products were concentrated under the control of temples and stayed within the city. However, Sargon's imperial project required the systematic dismantling of this temple-based communal economy. All empires require a constant flow of surplus products from periphery to the imperial core to sustain their ruling bureaucracy and standing army. The Akkadian Empire was no exception. Therefore, acting as suzerain over subordinate city-states, Sargon seized control of temple estates in every southern city-state and appointed sons of Akkad as ensis. Their job was to extract the surplus products via the temples as tribute to Akkad. Sargon justified his exploitation ideologically through self-deification. He took the title Strong God of Akkad and appointed his daughter Enheduanna as high priestess to the moon god Nanna at Ur. By deifying himself rather than ruling on behalf of the city's patron deity, he sent a message. Surrendering society's surplus to the royalty is equivalent to offering it to the gods. For the remainder of Mesopotamian history, temples would operate under direct palace control. The Akkadian dynasty made no pretense of governing on behalf of local economies. It was brutally extractive, turning the economic functions of temples and local institutions against their communities. This transformation had devastating consequences for the people of Sumer. Previous rulers of Sumer periodically declared debt cancellation to mitigate the economic damage caused by war or crop failures. Rents and fees owed to the temples were written off to help people out of economic hardship. However, under Akkadian rule, no such proclamations were recorded, since any measures reducing the temple's income would impede the flow of tribute to Akkad. Local ensis and priests therefore lost their independence and became mere governors, accountable only to the king. They were frequently relocated from one city to another, with no possibilities of developing local loyalties. The remaining noble families from previous dynasties were kept at court. Their status could be described as part dignitary, part hostage. Social mobility diminished greatly for ordinary citizens. Only a small percentage of commoners were able to advance themselves in the military or the imperial bureaucracy. Most struggled with declining living standards under tribute extraction. Sargon and his sons engaged in unprecedented brutality. His son, Remush, devastated several key urban centers, including Ur, Umma, Lagash, and Elam. Many large cities went into decline or were abandoned completely. The city of Lagash, which had already suffered severely in pre-Sargonic wars, barely recovered and built very few monuments during the Akkadian era. The city of Umma, once a thriving city of over 400 hectares, shrank to somewhere between 200 and 40 hectares. It is therefore not surprising that a significant number of uprisings occurred during the Akkadian period. A particularly widespread revolt broke out sometime during the reign of Naram-Sin. Rebel cities formed a large coalition led by Kish, Uruk, and Nippur. In 9 battles, Naram-Sin was able to suppress this uprising. After the victory, he declared himself king of the Four Quarters and deified himself as the god of Akkad. In this way, he claimed personal title to all land, workshops, and property throughout the empire. The declaration placed local governance at odds with imperial authority. It further weakened the administrative and religious institutions necessary for stable governance. Meanwhile, external threats continued to mount against the empire. The Gutians, a tribal people from the Zagros Mountains, made incursions into Sumer. Naram-Sin's successor, Sharkalishari, defended his realm against these invaders, as well as the Elamites and Amorites from western border regions. However, his victories were merely holding operations. His successors held no political importance beyond Akkad's immediate borders. The empire had begun to unravel. With increasing frequency, Gutians controlled Sumer via local ensis who retained only nominal autonomy. The Gutian domination that followed was chaotic. According to the Sumerian king list, 21 different kings had ruled in the time span of 91 years. After sacking Sumer's cities, the Gutians could not manage the urban administrative systems. The Curse of Akkad illustrates the resulting societal decline using vivid imagery. Its chariot roads grew nothing but the wailing plant. On its canal boat, tow paths, and landings, no human being walks because of the wild goats, vermin, snakes, and mountain scorpions. Gutian brigandage blocked the overland trade that Sargon had developed to the north and Asia Minor. The economic disruptions were substantial. At the same time, it did break Akkad's military looting and tribute-taking. In this sense, the Curse of Akkad was correct in describing the Gutians as agents of divine retribution against an empire that had plundered the sacred temples of Sumer. In the chaos of Gutian invasion, the political structure of the region reverted toward local dynasties during the half-century interregnum between the fall of Akkad and the rise of Ur III dynasty. However, the economic transformation created by the Akkadian Empire was irreversible. Temple-based governance, based on mutual support and economic balance, gave way to imperial tribute extraction. Centralization of political power reached a peak never seen before. Rulers were deified, and the palace directly controlled the temples. Trade and administrative enterprises were assigned to royal families acting in quasi-official capacity, and private wealth began to accumulate outside palaces and temples. This emerging class of entrepreneurial families engaged in rural usury, appropriated land, and acquired bondservants. Previously, rulers such as Urukagna only had to address the economic burdens imposed by the palaces and temples' fees. Post-Sargonic rulers, on the other hand, faced much greater difficulties as private wealth began to pry away land and labor from rulers' control. This gave rise to some intriguing legal and financial innovations under the dynasties of Isin, Larsa, and Babylon. One of the examples is the creation of financial markets in the Isin-Larsa period, where income rights of temple offices are traded like shares of a modern joint stock company. Looking back at the economic foundation of Akkad, we can see that the collapse of the world's first empire came about through a fatal convergence of several key factors. The destruction of local economic resilience through the plunder of temple estates, the exploitative tribute system that led to continuous rebellion, the Gutian invasion that disrupted trade and tribute-taking, and lastly, the 4.2 kilo-year drought that intensified the above weaknesses inherent to Akkadian imperialism. Sargon and his successors built an imperial machine capable of extracting vast amounts of wealth, but they failed to create a social safety valve that enabled imperial relations to be reproduced over time. When the rain stopped falling and the Gutians descended, there was no longer a collective societal framework that could absorb the shock. No temple reserves available during emergencies, no local authorities able to rally defense forces, no debt amnesty to periodically restore economic balance. The world's first empire had consumed its own foundations, and in doing so, it bequeathed to history both a cautionary tale about the dangers of excessive imperial extraction and an influential precedent for the militarized, centralized states that would follow. Thank you for watching. I would really appreciate it if you could give me a like or subscribe to my channel. Have a good day. I will see you next time.